For a full-time poser like myself, nothing makes me happier than learning worthless punk rock trivia that I can use to impress real punks at shows. By arming yourself with trivial punk rock knowledge, not only can you trick real punks into thinking you're one of them, you can actually talk down to them for not knowing what you yourself just learned yesterday from a YouTube video. In this video, I'm going to equip you with 10 facts you can use to start talking down to your punk rock friends today. They might already know some of these facts, maybe even most of them, but they won't know all 10. How do I know that? Because no real punk I've ever met knows more than like 6 things about anything. And all you really need to get up on your high punk rock horse is one piece of trivia that you know and they don't. So listen up closely as I drop 10 random facts about punk rock on you. Make sure to pay attention, because you never know which fact will be the one to blow the mind of whatever real punk you're trying to impress. Take notes, put on a pot of coffee, maybe smoke a little crack if you got any left. Do whatever you need to do to focus, because you're about to get schooled with lots of useless information, just like real school. Number 1, punk rock PhD. Singing about how awful the education system is, how it's designed to indoctrinate and not educate, has been a common theme in punk rock since its inception. Generally, in the eyes of punk rock, school is not cool. Yet, there have been a few old-school punks with 10 times more street cred than you and I combined who have gone on to earn a doctorate in something or another. Now, it's no secret that Milo went to college. But did you know that the Descendants frontman kept going to college until he earned his PhD in biology from UC San Diego? It's true. Milo might be a pervert, but he's also a scholar with postdoctoral research experience in molecular biology. However, he's not the only battle-tested punk rocker with PhD after his name. Bad Religion frontman Greg Graffin earned a PhD in zoology from Cornell. Graffin has taught evolutionary biology and natural science courses at several universities, authored several books, and even has an extinct species of bird named after him, Kelania graffini. This tried-and-true punk rocker might think religion is bad, but he obviously thinks education is good. And lastly, there's Dexter Holland. The Offspring frontman might not have any self-esteem, but he does have a PhD in molecular biology. It took him years to complete, but in the end, nothing could keep him separated from his studies. Now, you might have noticed that all these punk rock professors have degrees in the life sciences. Does that mean some academic disciplines are more punk than others? Yes, that's exactly what it means. Biology tops the list as the most punk, along with the other physical sciences. There's nothing unpunk about wanting to understand the world around you. But the least punk thing you could study in school? Business. There's nothing less punk than getting a graduate degree in business. It goes against everything punk once stood for. So, if you've got punk rock in your DNA, you should run away from anyone claiming to have a punk rock MBA. Number 2, punk rock MD. Speaking of doctors who have sprung out of the Offspring, Dexter Holland isn't alone. Their first drummer after Dexter switched to playing guitar was named James Lillia, and he left the band to pursue a career in medicine. I guess being the drummer of a punk band wasn't getting him enough pussy, so James went to med school and became a gynecologist. After completing med school in a lengthy residency, the former Offspring drummer became double board certified as an obstetrician-gynecologist and as a gynecologic oncologist. In other words, he's a medical doctor who specializes in treating pussy cancer and delivering babies. So Lillia went from being a member of the Offspring to delivering the offspring of his patients. Number 3, the birth of Christ. Long before the Offspring's original drummer left the band to begin delivering babies, a child by the name of Jesus Christ was born. But I'm not talking about the one born in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago who healed the sick and preached about things like love, acceptance, and humility. I'm talking about the Jesus Christ born in New Hampshire in 1956, who used to like to throw his own shit at people and preached about things like murder, rape, and torture. Jesus Christ Allin, better known by his stage name GG Allin, was one of the wildest, craziest, most disgusting punk rockers to ever walk the earth. Allin would often piss, puke, spit, and shit while on stage. Sometimes he'd even throw his shit at the crowd or just randomly start punching fans in the face. The man was a true artist. While the original Jesus' dad was a carpenter, Gigi's dad, Earl Allin, was a religious nut. You don't say. He named his son Jesus Christ after claiming to be visited by the real JC. Too bad Jesus didn't mention to Earl that naming his son Jesus Christ would fuck him up just as badly as if he'd named him something like Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler Allin. Though his birth name was Jesus Christ Allin, when Gigi was about 5, his mother divorced Earl and changed his name to Kevin Michael Allin. But clearly, changing her son's name didn't change the direction his life was heading in. From the second little Gigi was born, he was destined to become one of the biggest pieces of scum to ever bite into the punk rock world. Number 4, Forever Young. For a movement that was supposed to be about individualism and nonconformity, There sure were a lot of punk bands with similar names back in the 80s. It's like how today, if I asked you to name a rapper, any rapper, there's like a 2 in 3 chance they've got Lil in the name. Just like how in the 1980s, it seemed like every other punk band was named Youth This or something Youth. Let's see. In 1980, 3 well-known bands with youth in the name formed: Reagan Youth, Youth Gone Mad, and Youth Brigade. In 1981, Wasted Youth, Euthanasia, and a different youth brigade popped up. Then, of course, Youth of Today, Youth Defense League, Malignus Youth, and plenty of other bands with youth in the name came along. These guys might have wanted to stay young till they died, but none of them did. Well, except the ones who died young, which was quite a few of them. But the ones who have survived are now all old as fuck. And that's coming from me, a guy who probably seems old as fuck to most of you. These guys are dinosaurs, anything but youthful. So if they want to keep touring, they should have to change their names to things like Octogenarians of Today and Elderly Brigade. Number 5. 2 of a kind. Pick a card, any card. Now pick another. Assuming I'm only using one deck and you're not a cheating piece of shit, there's no possible way you got 2 of the exact same card. However, in the music world, if you pick a band, any band, and then pick another, there is the possibility that you'll get 2 bands with the same name. In 1980, 2 different bands named Youth Brigade popped up nearly 3,000 miles away from each other, one down in DC, the other out in LA. Now, neither of these bands had more than a few members, so I don't know where they got Brigade from. A brigade has thousands of members. Youth Battalion wouldn't have made sense either, since they have up to 1,000 members. Even a youth platoon would have several times more members than both these bands combined. So a name like Youth Squad or Youth Team would have made a lot more sense than Youth Brigade. Though it might not be ideal, it is often legal for more than one band to use the same name, but not always. Fortunately for the 2 youth brigades, these punk rock military units never had to go to battle in court since the DC-based Youth Brigade played original material and broke up within a year of forming. But the leader of a well-known West Coast punk band refused to wave the white flag when another band started using his band's songs and name, at least half of it. Number 6. 1 of a kind. In 2013, 2 different versions of the highly influential hardcore punk band Black Flag reunited. One called Black Flag, made up of founding member, guitarist, and main songwriter Greg Ginn, singer Wrong Rays, and a couple of other random people. The other, simply called Flag, made up of several former Black Flag members including Keith Morris, Des Cadena, Chuck Dukowski, and Bill Stevenson. Ginn, along with his label, SST Records, had a nervous breakdown and took Flag to court, making it his war to get them to stop using the name and playing the songs he wrote, claiming it damaged the real Black Flag's reputation. Additionally, Ginn also filed an injunction against former Black Flag frontmen Henry Rollins and Keith Morris for selling t-shirts with the iconic Black Flag bars on them and for trying to trademark the logo themselves by slipping in an application to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. In Ginn's head, this logo, a logo you'll find on the arms of punks and posers everywhere, belonged to him and SST Records alone, so he said, "Gimme, gimme, gimme." The verdict left Ginn wanting to bang his head against the wall because the judge sided with Flag, saying they could use the name and play the songs. Further, the judge said, "I don't care about the injunction against Henry and Keith, and that neither Ginn nor SST Records claim ownership of the bars." Being an old-school punk himself, the judge noted that while trademark infringement is quite punk, filing a trademark infringement lawsuit against your former bandmates is just about as unpunk as it gets. Number 7. Major Threat. Speaking of Henry Rollins, he might not get along with Greg Ginn, but he does get along famously with another hardcore punk hero and DIY record label owner, Ian MacKaye. Rollins, whose name is actually Henry Garfield, I assume he changed it so as not to be confused with the fat, lazy, lasagna-loving cat, and MacKaye have been good friends since childhood. The lifelong pals grew up in Glover Park, a neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where they both developed a love for loud, fast music and played in minor bands before each becoming major icons of the punk rock movement. Ian MacKaye, whose name I've heard pronounced incorrectly by like 1,000 people, including Ian himself, is best known for being the frontman of the bands Minor Threat and later Fugazi, a name I've also heard mispronounced 1,000 times. Fugazi? Fugazi? But before Minor Threat formed and Ian became a teen idol, he played in a band called the Teen Idols. Along with Jeff Nelson, the drummer for the Teen Idols and later Minor Threat, Ian formed Dischord Records in 1980. Same year my umbilical cord was cut. Since then, the independent label has been anything but idle, releasing hundreds of records, including some of Ian's side projects like Egg Hunt and Screwball Grand Union. But Dischord Records doesn't just release Jeff and Ian's music. They've released albums by lots of DC-based artists, including Government Issue, Jawbox, Dag Nasty, and even Henry Rollins. Before joining Black Flag in 1981 and becoming the muscular punk rock icon we all know and love, Someone's got a hetero man crush. Young Garfield was the lead singer of the band State of Alert, aka SOA. Though SOA only existed for about 9 months and only played 9 shows before they were SOL, they did record a 10-song EP called No Policy that came out in 1981. It was the second released by Dischord Records after Minor Disturbance by the Teen Idols. Though Ian and Henry might have only been a minor threat in the early 80s, the two buddies would go on to have a major influence on the underground music scene, eventually reaching legendary status in the punk rock world. Number 8. Sell Out. In the 1980s, bands like Black Flag and Minor Threat, through their love of music and their DIY work ethic, paved the way for record labels in the 1990s, through their love of money and total lack of ethics, to cash in on the increasingly watered-down punk rock movement. With million-dollar contracts being handed out left and right, lots of punk bands were quick to stand up and sell out in the hopes of cashing in. And a handful of those bands got to cash some real big checks after selling not just their souls, but also millions of records. Sublime, one of my favorite punk-influenced bands from the 90s, has sold over 6.5 million copies of their self-titled album. Originally, they were going to call the album Killin' It, but Brad, the singer, killed that idea by accidentally killing himself before the album came out, and they ended up changing the name. The Offspring have given birth to several albums that smash Sublime's record sales numbers. Though their 1998 release Americana has only sold about 5 million copies to Americans, it's gone on to sell 11 million worldwide. But it was the Offspring's 1994 album Smash that ignited a frenzy of album sales, with at least 12 million sold worldwide. Ever since the Offspring came out to play, they've sold over 40 million records. But even they don't top the list. I couldn't possibly talk about best-selling punk albums without mentioning acts like Blink-182 and Avril Lavigne. Oh wait, yes I can, because Blink-182 is about as punk as installing blinkers on your skateboard, and Avril's got about as much punk blood flowing through her veins as Punky Brewster or CM Punk. But I have no doubt about the authentic punk roots of another female-fronted band that has sold millions of records. Tragic Kingdom, No Doubt's third studio album, has sold over 16 million units worldwide. She might be just a girl, but between No Doubt and her solo projects, Gwen Stefani is a girl who has sold over 60 million records. The last band I'll mention is Green Day. What an appropriate name for this band, because ever since they dropped a big dookie on the world in 1994, these guys have been making so much money. For them, every day is Green Day. Now, I give Green Day a little credit because they did kerplunk their way onto the punk rock scene before it became super profitable. Dookie, the band's third studio album, and last good album, has sold over 20 million copies. And even though these American idiots haven't written a good song in over 25 years, they have sold over 75 million records worldwide. Lastly, I'll mention 2 more multi-platinum albums that helped inspire me and thousands of others of my generation to fall in love with punk rock. Actually, never mind. The album by Nirvana, which has sold 30 million copies, turned an entire generation onto the hardcore punk of the 80s that heavily influenced their sound. And then there was the Spaghetti Incident. After years of nothing but lies and destruction, Guns N' Roses released an album of all punk covers that went on to sell over 5 million copies. That incident turned me and countless others onto some obscure punk bands from the 70s and 80s we likely never would have heard of otherwise. Ain't it fun discovering new music filled with attitude and raw power? Number 9. What the fuck does that stand for? Some band names consist of a single word that has a simple meaning. Some contain multiple words that actually make sense together, while others combine words to create a cool-sounding but nonsensical name. And then there are those dreadful band names made up entirely of initials that do nothing but annoy and confuse anyone who tries to make sense of them. Now, I love a good acronym. In other words, initials that form an actual word. NERD, Big Audio Dynamite, and Jimmy 8 World are examples of acronymic band names because their initials form a new word. If you take the initials of Big Audio Dynamite, for example, you get bad. Take the initials of Jimmy Eat World, well, you get the idea. But the names of several punk bands are made up of non-acronymic initials, which, in my opinion, should be a big no-no. And as I'm sure you know from unsuccessfully trying to convince your girl to let you put it where it doesn't belong, no means no. But do you know what NoFX means? No doubt you've heard different explanations for the name like me. But what does it actually stand for? When I first discovered NoFX in the 90s, I heard from a few different people that the name meant no fucking straight edge. This explanation kinda makes sense since the band often sings about drug use and came up during a time in the punk scene where lots of kids were jumping on the straight edge bandwagon, putting X's on their hands at shows and whatnot. Another explanation I've heard is that NoFX literally means no FX, as in they don't use any fancy sound effects. But if you've ever seen NoFX live, you know this is bullshit because you can clearly see all the effects pedals they use. However, according to guitarist and founding member Eric Melvin, neither of these are true. He says they came up with the name NoFX while having a casual conversation about the Boston hardcore band Negative Effects that had recently broken up. Well, isn't that boring? Despite Melvin's explanation, lots of people still have no idea what NoFX means. I think a better name for NoFX would have been NoFC, since no one has any fucking clue what it means. And even if we did, no one fucking cares. NoFX isn't the only punk band known by their non-acronymic initials. There's also TSOL, MDC, MXPX, SNFU, DFL, DRI, and many, many more. But names made up of confusing initials aren't limited to just punk bands. Perhaps even more confusing is the name of one of the greatest punk rock venues of all time, the legendary CBGB's. Located in Lower Manhattan, every punk band worth its weight in Mohawk glue played there during the 23 years the club existed. Now, technically, the venue's full name was CBGB and OMFUG. Since no one knew what that meant, everyone just called the place CBGB's. But no one seemed to know what that meant either. I'd heard cool bands, good beer, crappy bands, grumpy bartender, and about 10 other possibilities over the years. As it turns out, CBGB and OMFUG actually stood for Country, Bluegrass, Blues, and Other Music for Uplifting Gormandizers. And although no one can ever remember all that, I just said it and I've already forgotten it, anyone who got to go to a show at CBGB's before it closed in 2006 will likely remember the place forever. Number 10. The oldest profession. Do you consider yourself to be a punk in the truest sense of the word? Do you want to show the world what an old-school punk you are? Great, here's $5. Get on your knees and start sucking, because the word punk dates back to Shakespeare's day and originally meant prostitute. From about the 1500s to the 1700s, the word punk, often spelled P-U-N-C-K-E, meant female hooker. By the late 1700s, the meaning had changed to mean a young man being used for sex by an older man. And by the 19th century, the word punk had evolved to mean hoodlum or ruffian like it does to this day. It was this definition of punk that inspired the first use of the term punk rock in the early 1970s. Back then, punk rock was made up of misfits, hoodlums, ruffians, and outcasts, so the term punk rock made sense. But the term punk still makes sense for newer bands too, if you use the original definition of the word. When I think of a band like, say, Sum 41 who have made ungodly sums of money by branding themselves as punk rock even though they formed years after the movement had come and gone, I'm okay with calling them punk, because I basically see them and other punk bands from that era as whores trying to make a quick buck, just like I see their managers and record labels as being their pimps. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment with a sexy high-class punk I need to get to. And now you know 10 pieces of worthless punk rock trivia that you can use to make yourself feel superior to your punk friends, even though they're the ones who turned you onto the scene in the first place. Do you know any other random punk rock facts that this poser didn't mention? Tell me in the comments.
You're so annoying.
If you like these videos and want to help support this channel, visit my brand new Patreon page where I'll be adding exclusive bonus content, behind-the-scenes footage, and more. Link in the description. And if you'd like to hear some of my music, click the other link in the description, or search for this dude on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to music.